Hi, I'm Pranamya, and you're watching Pages of the Globe. So, if this is your first time at my channel, I read short stories and poems, and then I give you a very deep analysis about them. I tell you a lot of things about the short stories and the poems, and the reason that my channel is a little different from most is because I actually don't read books. I don't do audiobooks. I do audio short stories. And what I try and do is I focus on the short story and then I focus on each and every line and what is the historical context of it and how does it apply to now and why was it written, what about the author, and I tell you basically everything I can about the story or the poem, and then I leave it up to you guys to decipher whatever you want and get your own analysis. Now, if you want to know a little bit more, I would always recommend watching the intro video that is pinned on my channel. But if you don't, that was basically the rundown of it. And without further ado, let's get on with our poem today that I'm going to be actually reading. So the poem that I'm going to be reading today is Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. Now, the reason that I'm going to be reading this is because, first of all, it's just such a beautiful poem. It has such amazing lines. And while there is the obvious message that I will be going into in the analysis, I think there's a very important message that we can apply to right now. Even me as a 15-year-old. So I think something that's very interesting to me is the fact, just in the title, Because I Could Not Stop for Death, I think that's very, it reminds us about just how in a lot of things in our life, we can't ever seem to stop for them, right? We can't ever seem to just pause and smell the flowers, like they say. And I think that a lot of our life is just this fast-paced movement. And I think that's so wonderfully shown in this poem. And while that's not actually the message of it, I think there is something to say about the fact that in this poem, basically, there is a character, or the main character, who just talks about how she could not stop for death, and so she went along this carriage ride and she goes through this graveyard of her memories, basically. And while it's such a wonderful poem, I couldn't help but relate it back to my life, because obviously that's what a reader does. Anytime you're reading any piece of literature, whether it's a short story, a poem, a novel, maybe even a trashy magazine, you try and relate it back to your life. And so while I don't think I'll be dealing, or hopefully I won't be dealing with that path, it just made me wonder about the fact that there's just always so much going on that we don't ever stop and just think back to the memories. I mean, I can't think about the last time that I thought about what I did when I was in elementary school or maybe even middle school. And all of those little memories that bubble up in your head, it's so important to just think back and just sit down, take a chill, and just think about those. Because while I was reading the story, I just felt this intense sense of nostalgia. And what I found was so interesting was I just kept thinking in my head as I was looking for poems to read on this channel. And I was reading this and I was like, where do I feel like I've read this before? And obviously I haven't. I've never read it in elementary or middle school, but it just reminded me so much of my childhood. And I think that just speaks volumes, that a simple piece of text can remind you of basically any part of your life. And I think that itself is just such a good sign that this text that I'm about to read is very, very beautiful. And I don't want to say life-changing, but I think it is just a good reminder to have. And I think that's why I read these stories on my channel, is because while reading books and reading novels is always an amazing thing, and you always learn so much, I think the beautiful thing about short stories and poems is that they give you a very strong message in just a couple pages. And I talk about this in my intro video as well, is that the reason that I do this on my channel is because, first of all, you don't see a lot of these channels on YouTube. You don't see a lot of short story reading channels on YouTube, and I want to introduce that. And I think more and more during my videos, I want to start talking about why I do what I do, because I feel like it's so important, and there has to be a reason why I'm spending hours and hours on one video trying to give you a proper analysis of it. Now, without further ado, let's get on with the poem. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below what you would like me to read next. Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had to put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of grazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and quill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. The end. Alright, so that was Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. Now, before I give you a deep analysis about it, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the poem. So it was composed in 1863, and in the poem, this female speaker tells the story of how she was visited by Death, who is personified as this kind gentleman, and she's taken for a ride in his carriage. Now, this ride appears to take the speaker past symbols of different stages of her life, before coming to a halt at what is most likely her own grave. Now, the poem can be read both as the anticipation of a sort of like heaven afterlife, and as something that's more bleak and down to earth. But much of its power comes from its refusal to offer easy answers to life's greatest mystery, which is what happens when you die. Now, when reading the actual poem, we see multiple literary devices or themes. We see a lot of themes here. So first of all, we see the timelessness of eternity. We see that in this poem, what makes death very much different from life is that whereas life is characterized by the way it unfolds and develops over time, death is something entirely different. It's an entirely different mode of being that exists outside of time. The poem concludes with the traditional name for such a timeless realm, eternity. As a concept, eternity is extremely difficult to understand due to more of its it just has a weird meaning, it has weird nature. On one hand, most definitions of eternity describe it as a condition where time is infinite. However, in any situation that involves an infinite amount of time loses all meaning. Basically, what I'm saying here is that if you are alive for an eternity, yes, you have an infinite amount of time, but at the same time, now that you have so much time, it doesn't really mean anything, which is a lot of time. But it really just, time as a concept only makes sense when it's limited in the case of just a regular, ordinary life. Human life, which is meaningful precisely because it doesn't go on forever. Now, in this poem, Dickinson explores this paradox in two very distinct ways. First, she depicts death as an inverted version of life, whereas life is time-bound, death is timeless. Second, and more profoundly, she depicts eternity, not as a concrete place, but as a sort of horizon that even at the end of the poem remains in the distance. Now, that is it for today. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next. So this is the end of the video, I know, and you're probably like, okay, I'm done. I've heard the story, I've heard the analysis, that's it, I'm done. But I just want to say, if you are thinking about, if you enjoyed my video, please subscribe. Please just somehow engage with this video, because what I'm trying to do here I feel like is very important, and unfortunately YouTube has put some restrictions on my videos so that sometimes people can't comment, and it's this whole thing that I'm trying to get in touch with them about. But I would just really appreciate it if you guys would maybe just like it, or just click the share button and copy link or something, Or if you could subscribe, that would be amazing. You don't even have to watch my videos. If you could just subscribe, that would be awesome. But yeah, that's it. I would just like to remind you yet again, I totally appreciate the support. And yeah, please comment down below what short stories you guys would like me to read next. Yeah, that's it.